It was the most profound thing. After I'd done my scene with him as Abraham Lincoln, he went, "Good job, really good job." I was like, "Oh my gosh, Daniel Day-Lewis and Abraham Lincoln just told me good job." So.
Hello and welcome to My Hollywood Story. I'm your host, Stacey Wilson-Hunt, and my guest today is the Golden Globe, Emmy, and Independent Spirit Award nominated actor, David Oyelowo, who is also the star and executive producer of the Apple TV Plus limited series, Government Cheese. I've known David since 2012, when I interviewed him and director Ava DuVernay about their movie, Middle of Nowhere. It has been a thrill to know him and to see his star continue to rise ever since. In what became one of my favorite conversations so far on this podcast, David shares some of his most surreal moments on set with co-stars Forest Whitaker, Tom Cruise, and Daniel Day-Lewis. He also reveals how Oprah Winfrey has changed his life, why he doesn't regret defying his beloved late father, and how telling quirky stories is the artist's ultimate luxury. My Hollywood Story is sponsored by Mattel Films and recorded at Neue House Hollywood. If you like what you hear, give us a follow, leave a review, and let us know what you think. Okay, everyone, please welcome my special guest, David Oyelowo. David, come on out. There he is. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hello. I'm very well, thank you.
So nice to see you.
You too.
Congratulations on your Apple TV Plus limited series, Government Cheese, which I've been enjoying and trying to understand in the best way, because it's a wild ride.
It is.
And how has it felt to be sharing this story with the world?
It has been a real joy. It's rare, certainly a new one for my career, where the often made phrase is, "I haven't seen anything quite like it before." Which is a wonderful thing in and of itself.
I love it. The ultimate compliment is, I've never seen anything like this before. But before we talk about that, we have many years to discuss. Prior to that, I want to go back to the beginning. And your story begins in Oxford, England, when you were born to parents from Nigeria. Tell me how they came to be living in Oxford, England.
They came to be living in Oxford because my dad was from the Yoruba tribe in Nigeria. My mum was from the Igbo tribe. And in the late 60s and 70s, there was a civil war called the Biafra Civil War. Basically, those two tribes were warring tribes. My dad was from a royal family in Oyo State, the Yoruba part of Nigeria. My mum was from the east, what used to be called Bendel State, and so their marriage was actually taboo. And so they effectively eloped to the UK to be married and be left alone. Also, with my dad being from a royal family, my mum essentially a commoner, so that was also frowned upon. And so that's how they came to move to the UK.
And what was it like to be a Nigerian immigrant in Oxford at that time?
Well, I was only 2 when they ended up moving from Oxford to London. And then I was only 6 when we moved from London to Nigeria. And we were there for 7 years. So we came back to the UK when I was 13. And so I can speak to that more because...
Which was sort of a double culture shift, because you had gone back to Africa and then coming back. What was that experience like?
Well, I'd grown up with my dad telling me that, we were part of this royal family in Nigeria. And all I had to go on was the British royal family. And I was like, well, we are living in a council estate. I do not think we are from a royal family. Thank you very much. But my dad also had these tribal marks on his face. And he had the word ballet written on his stomach. Now, when you're 6 years old and your dad has these tribal marks and you're like, what he actually told me is that he had fought with a tiger. And that was very helpful at school, because if anyone was trying to bully me, I would say, well, look, you really don't want to mess with me because my dad fought a tiger. And then my dad would come and pick me up from school and they would see like 4 marks on either side of his face.
That was terrifying, I'm sure.
It was terrifying for them, so I got left alone. Now, I was 6 at the time, so I actually believed this. But then I remember getting to the airport in Nigeria, my uncles all coming to pick us up from the airport. And I was like, so what? Everyone fought tigers? Like, what's going on? Like, everyone had these tribal marks.
When did it start to dawn on you that you've been sold a bill of goods with that
When I
story?
saw like 6 people who had all the same marks on their faces, that's when I thought, well, this tiger was really putting in work. But we did then live on Oyelowo Street. And we had an Oyelowo compound where our family lived. And I was like, oh, okay, But it's not the same thing, of course, as the British royal family. But there's a part of Oyo State called Awe where my grandfather was the king of, and so that was a real culture shock. All my parents' money went into our education. I had 2 younger brothers. So we went to school with some of the wealthiest people in Nigeria, but then I actually was at boarding school for a time, so I would then come home and we were living in this tiny 2-bedroom apartment with not much money. And so it was a sort of really weird double life, so to speak. But the formative thing for me was living in a country where I wasn't a minority.
Right. I was going to ask, how did that feel?
It was, like I say, formative, because you don't realize how erosive a minority mentality can be until you come out of it. And you live in a society where most people look like you. Every opportunity that's on offer is yours for the taking. You're not being marginalized on the basis of the skin you walk in, or your culture or ethnicity. And that just shifted my disposition from a self-worth standpoint for me personally. And the only reason I know that is by the time we moved back to the UK when I was 13, I sort of moved differently than the other black kids at my school, or because I'd been brought up in a culture where a lot of, whether it's racism, prejudice, all the things that were very, very present in British culture, of course here as well, were things that I hadn't been subjected to for a while. And I call it the Sidney Poitier syndrome. I don't think he could have achieved what he did in this country at the time he did it if he hadn't grown up in the West Indies, because he just carried himself differently. I think if you're going into situations already and quite rightly assuming that you are going to meet with obstacles, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you're walking into rooms kind of going, I own the place,
I deserve to be in this room.
I have self-worth, all that kind of stuff, I think it changes things. And so that was something that I couldn't have expected to be a byproduct of growing up in Nigeria for a time.
And were you able to carry that with you at age 13, then reinserting yourself in British culture? Because that's a hard age, too, for kids, to kind of figure out who you are, where you fit in, who your friends are.
Yeah, it was tough for me, if I'm honest. I was bullied a lot because in Nigerian culture, respect for elders is a big, big thing. You do not talk back to elders. And I went to just a state school where the teachers were dealing every day with kids being disrespectful and things like that. I wore my uniform properly and things like that. So I got called a coconut a lot, which is, black on the outside, white on the inside, simply because I was polite to my teachers and weirdly, again, for a myriad of reasons that we will not be able to get into, here, the notion was, as a black kid growing up in that part of London, to be black was to be playing truant and being, whatever it is. So most of my bullying was from other black kids, which really confused me, and I got one particularly bad beating from a guy who, as he was beating me up, his thing was, you think you're better than me, was the thing he kept on saying. And I just couldn't understand
that. Must have hurt a lot.
It did. His words hurt more than the punches, if I'm totally honest.
And were you able to talk to your parents about these experiences?
Yes. And that's where I talk about the formative component, because my dad helped me quantify what was actually happening. And I remember him saying to me, do you think you're better than this person? I said, no, that is not. And did you do anything wrong to this person? I said, no. Then he said, that's that person's problem, not yours. And you must continue to do what you're doing, because your light tends to be a mirror to other people, and they feel that it exposes things in them that they may not like. And that was huge for me, because that's the kind of moment where you potentially would make yourself small, and having parents who recognized why I was being subjected to that and how to navigate it, actually it had the opposite effect. I went, okay, I owe it to myself and to that person who was bullying me to not dim my light, so to speak.
I'm so sorry you went through that, but I'm grateful you had parents who could guide you through those experiences. And not a lot of kids do have the wherewithal to be able to speak openly at home. Maybe they're afraid or they're ashamed or they don't want to appear weak. And so I'm so grateful you had that support.
Thank you.
This episode of My Hollywood Story is brought to you by the Starz Limited series 3 Women. Shailene Woodley, Betty Gilpin, DeWanda Wise, and Gabrielle Creevy star in an intimate, haunting portrayal of female desire that finds 3 women on a crash course to radically overturn their lives. 3 Women, for your Emmy consideration for Outstanding Limited Series and streaming now on the Starz app. When did you start to feel like an artist? When did acting or the arts start to come into your life as something that interested you?
It happened quite late for me because my parents did not value the arts because, again, immigrant parents moving to...
I just spoke to Uzo Aduba about this very topic, and it sounds very similar.
Yeah, it's pretty universal in that if you have come away from your country of origin and you're trying to build a better life, a different life for your kids, the notion tends to be, okay, what are the best, most safe, most stable professions or circumstances for my child? The arts is definitely not that.
Seems to be kind of a universal, no matter who you are, parents are a little worried, right?
Correct. And then you 10x that when you cannot see any evidence of it. Certainly in British culture at the time, my mum's favorite actor was Sidney Poitier, and her favorite film was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But, growing up in North London in the 80s and early 90s, the notion of your son being anything like Sidney Poitier or aspiring to anything like that, you might as well be saying, okay, so I want to be a Martian.
And he was seen as a beautiful light, but an aberration, not something that was the norm by any stretch.
Completely anomalous, completely other in relation to our experience. And so, it was never something that was... celebrated, and I was, like I say, respect for elders was a big thing growing up. So my dad, like a lot of Nigerian parents, probably a lot of immigrant parents, they had 3 sons. They wanted a lawyer, a doctor, and an engineer. I was supposed to be the lawyer, and I was fine with that, and I was obsessed with a show called LA Law. And
we're familiar with it, David.
Oh yeah. Well, but my primary focus was Blair Underwood. I was like, oh my gosh, that he looks like me. He's Adonis of a human being. I don't mean that way.
You're
but
equally handsome for the record.
Thank you.
He was so young, by the way.
He
was like 22 on that show.
That's the thing. I was looking at this guy going, oh my gosh, I can somehow fit what I see in the mirror into this person on the screen. And what was amazing is he was a lawyer, as my dad wanted me to be. So there was, And what I didn't realize is that it was the acting part of Blair Underwood that I was drawn to, not the lawyer so much. But no, it wasn't until and I did theatre studies and I did drama and I did plays as a teenager, but it wasn't until I was graduated from high school. I was all set. I took a gap year and I was gonna go and do a law degree at Oxford. But my teacher, who had taught me drama at school, I bumped into her at a train station during my gap year, and she said, "David, I wouldn't say this to any other of my students, but I think you could really do this professionally." And it had not occurred to me because of my upbringing. So she took it upon herself to help me apply to drama schools, help me with my auditions, and then I got into the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, but the significant thing was I got a scholarship to go to LAMDA. And I remember telling my dad, I was so nervous. I was saying,
I was going to say, this must have been a tough conversation.
It was a very, very tough conversation, but there's a twist in the tale. I went to my dad and I said, so I got into drama school, Daddy. And he goes, "What is drama school?" I was like, "Well, it's where you go and study to be an actor." "Actor? You mean like all of those jesters?" I was like, "Well, no, I'm not. No, that's not where you learn to be a jester. It's just where you go and like you see in the films and TV like that." And I said, "Oh, and by the way, I got a scholarship." "Eh? You got this?" "Aha! We can tell everybody at home, you are a scholar." So I was like, I buried the lead. Obviously, I should have just started with that and said I got a scholarship to somewhere. Everything would have been fine after that.
He just wanted a reason to brag about you to someone.
That's a big thing for Nigerians. Bragging rights is a big thing for Nigerians. So I think he thought I was going to grow out of it after the 3 years of being at drama school. But that's when I first felt like an artist, was literally being at LAMDA with all these other students, all pursuing a vocation that was an artistic one. Before then, it all sort of felt like a hobby.
Well, how important was it that you didn't get your father's approval per se, but that he was okay with this decision, for you to feel okay with it?
The two biggest decisions in my life were ones that my dad particularly opposed, and I defied him on both, and I'm very glad I did. It was becoming an actor, and it was marrying my wife.
Yes, and I was just going to bring up Jessica.
Yeah. So, I remember introducing him to Jess, who's white, and my dad experienced a lot of racism in the UK when he first moved there. We were 19 and 21 when we got engaged.
And you met her at school?
I met her, actually, that same teacher sent me to do a youth theatre program called National Youth Music Theatre, and that's where I met Jess when we were 17 and 18. And so we became friends, and then we fell in love, and it all happened quite quickly. And I said to my dad, "I think I've met the person I want to marry." And then I introduced him to Jess, and he said, "One day she's going to wake up and realize you are black." That was literally the first thing he said.
And he's not trying to be funny saying this.
No, he was not. If only he was trying to be funny. So, I had to defy him on that front as well. But I mean, for my dad, it was completely understandable because, again, he didn't see any evidence of success for black people on British TV or anywhere else. What he had experienced when he came to the UK was, he would come home and my mom would take off his jacket and hide it from him while she cleaned it because he had dried up spit on the back of his jacket from just people spitting at him. He once had hot coffee thrown in his face.
And he wanted to protect you.
Again. So it was completely understandable that it was coming from his own lived experience, which thankfully was not my lived experience, but it was, I never doubted that it was coming from a place of love, is the thing. But I also felt very strongly he had taught me to not dim my light. And so in many ways, my defiance of him was me doing the thing he had taught me to do, because I somehow recognized that he was coming from a place of pain. And that was not necessarily going to be my experience. Maybe naively so, but that's why I went in a different direction.
I'm so glad you defied him.
Thank you so much.
And Jessica's lovely, and I know they love her very much.
Yes.
I'd like to say a very special thank you to Neuhaus for being the exclusive venue partner of My Hollywood Story. Neuhaus is a gorgeous private work and social space for creators, innovators, and thought leaders to connect in Los Angeles and New York. As a Neuhaus member myself, I can tell you firsthand how amazing it is to work inside such iconic, beautifully designed buildings, while also enjoying elevated hospitality and thought-provoking cultural experiences. To me, Neuhaus has completely redefined the ideal environment for creative potential and progress. To learn more and apply for membership, visit neuhaus.com. So in 2001, if I'm not mistaken of the year, you became the first Black actor ever cast to play an English king in a major production of Shakespeare. This was King Henry VI at the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Yeah.
This was a landmark moment in what we would now call, quote, colorblind casting. And you endured a lot of hate in response to this experience. Tell me how you navigated that.
I was 23, so I was only about 2 years out of drama school, and I got cast to play Henry VI at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And I didn't know that I was the first Black actor to be afforded this opportunity. I just was elated that I was given this opportunity. But when we were in rehearsals, I found myself quite early on while we were rehearsing having to do interviews every lunch break because it had become this big thing in the press. And it all started because I think it was in the Telegraph newspaper, and Oxford Don, gosh, Oxford is coming up a lot in this interview, but a professor, I guess, at Oxford University had used this phrase and said, "We open ourselves to ridicule if we allow Black people to play these kind of roles," was the phrase. And that caught fire, and then it started this whole discourse about colorblind casting, and should a Black person be playing the King of England, and all that kind of stuff. And at one point I went, oh gosh, I recognized that my best weapon against this prejudice was going to be how well I played the role, not me trying to defend it in the press or so I stopped doing the interviews and I just focused on the work. And then wonderfully, that mindset was validated because the reviews were great, it was received incredibly well, and that kind of went away. And so, that has been something I've held close, that the best weapon against prejudice is excellence, and the only way to attain excellence is just to do the work. And so that's where I learned.
It must have felt good to read those reviews, though.
Well, I tell you what felt good was my dad, who, as we've already discussed, was so confused by the notion of me being an actor. He came to the press night, or the press day, because Henry VI is Henry VI Part 1, 2, and 3. So it was 12 hours of Shakespeare. You start at 10:30 in the morning, you finish at 10:30 at night. It's a miracle that my dad was able to get through that without falling asleep.
That's a lot of love that he felt for you.
Well, it helped that Jess was next to him with her elbow ready to nudge him. But he happened to come the day that Prince Charles at the time came to see the play. Now, for my dad...
Your fellow royal.
My fellow royal.
Yes.
My buddy Prince. Now, that was a big deal. For my dad to go, that's Prince Charles, and that's my son playing the King of England. I didn't anticipate that would be the day my dad would come. And so at the stage door afterwards, he was overwhelmed by that circumstance and just said, I cannot believe they allowed a Black man to play the King of England, and it is my son. And that was a huge turning point for him and for me, because I realized through him that something had shifted, and I was blessed to be a participant in the shifting of that. And that's where, for me, it sort of became cemented that this is a very, very potent, culturally powerful medium that isn't just about storytelling. It can shift discourse, empathy, break down prejudice, and that became something I consistently looked for in the work that I do.
And just the sheer presence of you on that stage, even if you hadn't said a word, the idea that you're just standing there in this venue, this exalted context of art is unto itself a statement.
It was a statement, but I stick by the fact that it had to be good. You know, the really difficult thing, I think, about being groundbreaking in any way or being part of a marginalized group that is afforded an opportunity is you feel the burden of, if this doesn't work, that will be the excuse. I am now going to be the receipt as to why we're not doing this again. That's an unfair thing to carry, but it's a real thing. And there are those who will happily take that receipt and wave it in your face and use it against not just you, all the people that you're hoping to keep the door open for behind you as well.
So true and very relatable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you became a very busy actor after that. We don't have enough time to go over every credit, David. We do have to move on with our day. But I do want to start with the first thing I saw you in. It was a small role, but I remember very clearly The Last King of Scotland in 2006. Forest Whitaker's Oscar-winning role. Insanely powerful performance. What do you remember? I know you didn't have, I don't think you had a direct scene with him or not a lot of scenes with him.
I did
but
not.
You were certainly on set. Kerry Washington's in this movie, James McAvoy. What do you remember about the feeling of being on that set, playing this role and feeling as if I am one touch away from Forest Whitaker? I'm so close to seeing what my career could become.
I think at that point we were only the second film ever to shoot in Uganda. A film called Mississippi Masala was the first. So there was no infrastructure in Uganda. And my first memory of seeing Forest Whitaker,
of course, he played Idi Amin.
He played Idi Amin in the film, was him sat on a chair in a sort of dirt patch with our makeup artist Sharon Martin doing a kind of makeup test with him, and she was airbrushing him darker because Idi Amin was a very dark man. And I didn't know this at the time, but Forrest stayed in character the whole time. And so she's spraying him, but like doing it from afar like this, because every time she would get it on him, he would go like that. And then there were chickens around him. So every time he did that, he would this makeup artist spraying his face. And I thought, what in the heck have I signed up for? What is literally, what is this? And then not long after that, in the hotel, Forrest is walking towards me. I go, oh, okay, it's Forest Whitaker. I'm going to say hello. I went, oh, hi, I'm David. He went,
you didn't know he was in character.
I didn't know he was in character. So I just thought, this is going to be bad. This is going to be
like a fever dream nightmare, essentially.
It was so much like that because Forrest stayed in character the whole time. Kevin MacDonald, it was his first... The director. It was his first narrative film. He had done a film called Touching the Void, which is a documentary, but he hadn't directed actors before. James McAvoy is as lovely as you like, not staying in character the whole time. So James and Forrest are not talking because who wants to be hanging out with Idi Amin?
And James couldn't give you a heads up like, hey, FYI, Forrest is in character.
Well, I eventually worked it out, but it didn't make it any easier, by the way. And then you're working in a country where, you know, there are a lot of local people being extras in the film, but they don't like, they're not professional at being supporting artists or anything like that. And so I remember one time we had this first AD who was a screamer. So he goes past, James and I are doing this scene, and then I just see in my periphery this guy get off the gurney, go around the camera. He's got a gown on with his butt out, and then walks in front of the frame again. And the first AD goes, "What the fuck are you doing? Get out of the shot!" so everyone stops, and this guy goes, I'm very sorry that I just thought that you wanted the people to be walking past the camera, so I thought I would go around the camera and walk past it. Get the fuck over there, you camera! And he was just like, this is very strange that you are shouting at me like this. And James and I are just looking and going, what is this movie? What is this movie? I say all that to say, I remember, because your assumption would be, okay, young actor, he's around, Forest Whitaker is like absorbing all this stuff. We thought it was a mess. And I remember being at the London Film Festival, myself, James McAvoy, Kerry Washington sat there, full of trepidation about what we were about to watch.
And rightfully so, by the way.
Absolutely. And watching this thing and going, and I remember we looked at each other and went, it's really good. I think it's really good. Because we were so shocked. So, you know, it's so crazy, that alchemy between what it feels like on the set and then the power of the edit.
I feel like I need a documentary about the making of The Last King of Scotland.
I have stories.
That could be your next feature with Jessica.
I have stories.
That was a wonderfully entertaining story, David. Thank you. Oh my, I have to recover from that. Okay. So jumping ahead, for me at least, looking at your resume, 2012 was a giant year. You appeared in 5 major motion pictures, including Lincoln, Red Tails, The Paperboy, Jack Reacher, and The Middle of Nowhere, directed by Ava DuVernay. I'd like to talk about Middle of Nowhere. It's also how we first met at TIFF in 2012, when you and Ava and the cast came in for an interview, and I was instantly enthralled. This was a very small movie, $200,000 budget, 19-day shoot, if I read correctly. What did you learn from her, and what were your first impressions?
Well, I have to give you context as to the miracle of how I actually did come to meet Ava. I met Ava because I was having this very nice run of doing these movies, and I was on a plane on my way to Vancouver to do reshoots for the film Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And I sat next to a guy who was watching a show I had done in the UK called Spooks, or MI5 as it was called here. And literally this guy pauses his iPad, looks at me and goes, is this you I'm watching on my iPad? And I looked and I went, yeah, that's me. And he goes, oh, good. Give me some advice. A friend of mine just asked me if I could put some money into a film. They asked for $50,000. It's this film called Middle of Nowhere. It's this lady called Ava DuVernay who's going to direct it. What do you think? I said, well, can I read the script? I can't just blankly tell you to put $50,000 into some random movie. So he sent me the script. We exchanged email addresses. I then had lunch with him in Vancouver. I went, not only do I think you should put money into this thing, I'm calling this director up and I want to be in her movie. So I got back to LA. On the script was the title, her name, her number. Called her up. I said, you don't know me. My name is David Oyelowo, and I would love to be in your movie if you'd have me. And she went, I cannot believe this is, are you punking me? Like, you are on my list of people I'd want, but I thought, there's no way this guy who's doing all these movies is going to want to. I said, absolutely, I want to do your movie. She went, yeah, you say that now. Trust me, your agents are going to dissuade you. And they did, try to dissuade me. Because it was $100 a day was what you got for doing the movie. And I said, no. They work for me. They are my employees. That's the way I see my agents. There's no way they're dissuading me.
Agents don't love indies.
No, they don't. They don't because of not much money. And a lot of them go by the wayside. I just had a gut feeling about this one. So yes, we ended up shooting it. She ended up winning Best Director at Sundance. And I knew in those few days of shooting with her that I had been in the presence of a genius. I just knew it to the core of my being. And it was at this point, I had already been cast in Selma, that was in 2010, by Lee Daniels. But because we just couldn't get the green light because they wouldn't give us the right amount of money to make it, he ended up leaving the project. I did a film called The Butler with him instead. So I was cast, but we didn't have a director. And so that was the point at which I went to Plan B and Path A, and I said, guys, I have found the director. There was absolutely no way that it shouldn't be this lady. And they were like, well, who is she? Like I said, she just won Best Director at Sundance. I said, okay, what was the budget for that film? $200,000? Amazing, right? And they were like, not so much, because Selma is quite a bit more than that. Anyway, but that's how Ava, after a lot of cajoling, came to...
So had you not sat next to that guy?
Literally.
That's incredible.
Rick Cohen. I owe so much to Rick Cohen.
Rick, wherever you are, thank you, sir.
Bless his heart. He's still in Vancouver. He wrote to me over my birthday recently.
I love those moments.
But yeah, it was...
what did she see in you that you hadn't experienced in terms of working with directors before?
The best directors I've worked with see in you that which you don't see in yourself. And they take you to places that you didn't even contemplate going, and therefore get things out of you that you didn't know were there. And that's Ava for me. The role I even play in Middle of Nowhere, the fact that I called her up and she said, I wanted you for this role, I was so shocked because, I'd played very few American roles. This is Ava's from Compton. I was to play a bus driver from
Very
Compton.
humble guy.
Very humble guy, very specific type of guy. I'm not that guy. Just in terms of my upbringing, where I grew up, all those things.
You're royal, after all.
Well, there you go. Again, calling me Prince David, it's fine. But she saw that in me when I hadn't even met her. And then I remember her taking me down to Compton, sitting me down with her friends, just steeping me in that environment.
And I know it was very important to her to tell a different story about Compton. I think for a lot of people it was Boys in the Hood, and
Correct.
there hadn't been that humanity baked into these stories. And she wanted to show, this is where I'm from. This is the cute house I lived in. It's different from what the world knew about it.
Exactly. And she was, and miraculously she was able to see me accessing that. So that's what I mean about, I wouldn't run towards playing a bus driver from Compton because I would be insecure about whether I could actually nail that. But she got that out of me. And so that, and I knew to the core of my being that playing Dr. King was somehow going to be part of my creative life. And so to have someone like that with me, getting whatever that performance would be out of me, became a complete obsession for me.
And such a comfort, I imagine.
Yeah, she's like my creative soulmate in a sense. I will never forget on the set of Selma, I could tell what she needed from the next take by the way she would say the word cut. We had got such a shorthand by then, which is not something that happens every day.
There's a reason people like to work with the same people over and over again, because there's a unwritten communication. Yeah.
It's chemistry.
It's chemistry.
It's chemistry, and you won't have that with everyone in life, in love, in art. But when it happens, hold on to it.
Absolutely. So Jack Reacher, anyone who has been in a room with Tom Cruise, I must ask, what is it like to act with Tom Cruise? What surprised you about that experience? And I actually love this movie. Chris McQuarrie directed. Yeah. It's a fantastic action movie. Yeah. On top of it just being a Tom Cruise vehicle, it's actually perfectly acted. Amazing cast. Tell me what your experience was with him.
Working with Tom on that movie illustrated to me that to have longevity as an actor is tied almost entirely to your work ethic. Because you can have talent, you can have luck to a certain, that you need a bit of that as an actor or an artist in terms of the doors that open for you. But he had been a movie star for 30 years at that point, and that was then. And I to the point whereby I actually remember, because Mission Impossible 4 was coming out as we were shooting that Jack Reacher, and he and I were just hanging out before a take, and I said, "How have you done this? How have you managed to be a bona fide movie star for 30 years consistently?" And he said, "David, on my first set that I was ever on, I went to every department and asked questions and learnt what they all do. And then I determined from that first movie, I was going to have a hand in creating every other movie I do. And so he said to me, David, the key is create, create, create. He literally said it like that. I'll never forget. He said it 3 times. And that's the way you get to orchestrate your own career. Just remain in a creative stance. Create the opportunities that you want to step into. That was it for me. I was like, okay, got it. And from that moment on, it unlocked something in me, because I recognized that the kind of roles I wanted to play, the kind of films I wanted to be in, were not coming my way. Yes, I had this wonderful run, but they were smaller roles in films that it was, not to say I was inconsequential. I like to think I was additive to those movies, but Lincoln would have happened without me. As would The Help, as would Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I was a cog in a wheel.
Also giant productions.
Giant productions. I hope it doesn't sound conceited, but I know what happened over those 7 years to get Selma made. That film doesn't happen without me every day fighting to get that film made, bringing on Ava, eventually bringing on Oprah to produce it.
You were producing the moment you met that guy on the plane.
Exactly right. And I didn't realize that's what I was doing. It wasn't till after we had finished the film, actually, that I went, oh, that's producing. I mean, I've not billed as being a producer on that, but I went, I can do that again.
If you're locking in the director, you're a producer.
Right. And if you are basically instrumental in getting the film made, you are literally producing, you are breathing life into this thing in order for it to exist. That's not what I was doing in these other productions. And when Tom told me that, it all kind of came together for me in where I went, okay, if he has to do that, and he's one of, if not the biggest movie stars in the world, it's the least I can do.
Oh boy, it's a lot. It's a lot to absorb. Really. Yeah. No, but wonderful lessons to learn early on. And do you ever get nervous when you're with someone like Tom in a scene where you're thinking, I'm with this iconic person? Does it ever affect your performance? And if so, how do you quell those feelings in terms of nervousness?
I think nervousness is just an occupational hazard of being an actor. You know, it's incredibly vulnerable. It's very exposing. We all have imposter syndrome. The way I offset it is preparation. You'll struggle to out-prepare me when it comes to a role. And that's tied to insecurity. That's tied to, okay, that's the one thing I can control, is how much work I have put in beforehand, so that when the nerves are going or I'm thrown by something, at least I have that bedrock of preparation underneath me. So yes, it's nerve-wracking being around Tom, but it's nerve-wracking just being with a crew who suddenly someone says action and you are supposed to be giving a performance that makes everyone's time that they're dedicating to this thing worthwhile. And trust me, you know pretty quickly if it's not working from the disposition of a crew.
They're often the toughest crowd.
Oh yeah, for sure. And not unlike doing theater, you are absorbing energy as to whether it's working or not. And sometimes that's your own third eye and insecurity telling you things that are not true. But the thing that I think everyone can appreciate is someone who's put in the work. You come in prepared, you know your lines.
Especially Tom. That's his favorite quality in a performer, I have a feeling.
My goodness. I had this bizarre experience where I was shooting Lincoln and Jack Reacher at the same time. And we were supposed to have worked out the dates so that I could be in Virginia and do my stuff there and then be back in Pittsburgh and do that. But Tom wanted me in this car chase, and I had got my agents to figure it out so that, I wasn't going to have to be the one to say to Tom, I can't be there that night.
You don't turn down a car chase with Tom Cruise.
Well, it was Daniel Day-Lewis and Spielberg on Lincoln. So it was kind of
champagne problems, David.
What do we do? So I remember getting a call from the first AD on Jack Reacher, and he got on the phone and went, Tom is really excited about tonight. He's just really excited. And I went,
And we know what Tom is like when he's excited. It's
correct.
a lot. It's
Correct. Tom being excited is not your average person being excited.
We remember the couch incident.
Exactly. So I was like, you do know I can't be there? I thought my agent had figured this out. Tom is really excited. I was like, okay. The next thing I know, Tom has called, because of course he knows Spielberg, Tom has called production, figured it out, sends a jet to come and get me. So I was shooting with Daniel Day-Lewis and Spielberg by day. The jet lands, I get on this plane, and I am shooting with Tom Cruise by night. Same day, same 24 hours. I mean, even as I'm saying it, I feel like I'm lying, but I literally have all the pictures because I documented the day.
We saw you in the movie. You're in the movie.
I'm in both movies. And what was so crazy is I got to that set, and the reason why I had to suddenly be pulled into that car chase is that they had to bring stuff forward because of weather. So Tom had been shooting for 24 hours, and then he was going into another 12 hours at night. So he was shooting like 36 hours to get the thing done before we get hit by weather. And I was like, how? How is it? And you know what was so amazing? There was a moment he sat down, just lay down and fell asleep for like 10 seconds. And then I saw Tom go, and I went, he's human. He's human, guys, he's human, he's human, he's human. But to be with Daniel Day-Lewis, who also stayed in character the whole time.
Very different
Lincoln.
character from Forest Whitaker.
Very different, but like is throbbing with Abraham Lincoln, the character. You're just going, oh.
Did you ever interact with Daniel on set?
I did. It was the most profound thing. After I'd done my scene with him as Abraham Lincoln, he went, good job, really good job. I was like, oh my gosh, Daniel Day-Lewis and Abraham Lincoln just told me good job. So, yes, I did talk to him.
Did you share these stories with your parents?
Yeah, but they wouldn't know.
It's a lot to try to explain.
They just didn't know. I literally said to my dad, Dad, I'm doing this film with Tom Cruise. He goes, Tom Cruise? Who is Tom Cruise? Okay, forget it, Dad. There's no point.
It's not even worth it.
It's not. He called Steven. He says, yeah, my son is doing a film with Steven Spielberg. I was like, don't you ever say that again, Daddy. Please don't call him Spielberg. So, that was the joy of my parents, is that they were sort of blissfully ignorant.
It's kind of a comfort in a sense. You don't have to over-explain. They just know you're happy and healthy and safe.
My feet were firmly on the ground.
That's right. And you had Jessica you could share stories with too.
Yeah.
So speaking of Spielberger.
Yes.
I think his name is Spielberg.
Yes.
So there are 145 speaking roles in Lincoln.
Yeah.
What did you learn from Steven about navigating that scale of a production? And also, what struck you about the way he interacts with actors?
You know what struck me is not just how he interacts with actors, but how he interacts with his crew. And the reason he is able to interact with them that way is he has cultivated a tribe around him. I'll never forget, I was doing this scene with Daniel Day-Lewis, and the other thing I couldn't believe is the scene, there were like 200 soldiers all about to be deployed. Daniel is sat there, and you could hear a pin drop. It was the most quiet set relative to the amount of people on set I've ever been in, and it was to do with the amount of focus that Daniel had, Spielberg had, but also his crew. There was a culture of reverence around filmmaking. And I will never forget this moment. I was doing offlines for Daniel, and Steven comes to my side. Janusz Kaminski, who, is always his DP, and he says something, some lens, and it goes something like 45, and he just puts his hand out, and before his hand has landed, it is in his hand, and he just brings it back there like that. And I thought, did anyone else just see what?
It's like a surgeon asking for a scalpel.
Literally. I had the same thing with Chris Nolan. I had a small run in Interstellar, and you just go, wow. The reason why these guys, in my opinion, are constantly and consistently touching greatness is to do with who they surround themselves with. Because it's one of the hardest things I think about filmmaking is you gather like 200 people together, and you're all supposed to function in a way whereby the goal of everyone manifests in something cohesive. That's like, making a film is like organizing a wedding every day, you know, and it's supposed to go well every day. It becomes so much easier when you have your team.
It's interesting with Chris and Steven. They're both such artisan filmmakers.
Right.
You know, they want to use real soldiers, not AI soldiers. They
Right.
actually want bodies being substituted or special effects. And I think we can feel that.
Yeah.
The handmade nature of their films. They still feel like, oh, humans made this, and not the algorithm.
Yeah.
At least that's how I feel when I see their work.
No, and that's what it's like to be on their sets, is that they understand that their job is to hold a mirror up to humanity. And that's the thing that is going to have the audience connecting or not, is the degree to which you were able to serve up something that felt like life, obviously elevated through incredible filmmaking. But that's what it feels like to be on their sets, and that, I think, is what we get from their movies.
Absolutely. And I'd like to talk a little bit about The Butler insofar as it helped to foster one of your most important relationships in your life, which is with Mama O, Oprah Winfrey, and you played her son in the movie.
The first time I ever met Oprah was really surreal. Oprah was auditioning to play my mother and Forest Whitaker's wife. And I just thought, this is crazy. In what world have I been cast and Oprah Winfrey is auditioning for anything? But it was indicative of the humility that she has despite who she is. Sometimes one of the hardest things, and I've produced now and directed films of my own, one of the hardest things is when actors assume that they're going to be offered a role that is really quite difficult, and you haven't seen evidence of that ability to do that role in their work already. So actually there are actors who lose out on roles because their agent says, well, it's got to be offer only. And I understand that. I've been a beneficiary of that. But every now and again, it's a role that I just don't know if it's in there. Like, I haven't seen anything that says Forest Whitaker can do Idi Amin, or, you know, we haven't seen Oprah in this way before, smoking cigarettes.
Totally. She was like kind of sultry and boozy.
Yeah, you know, we just hadn't seen that side of her. So understandably, Lee put her through her paces. So anyway, that was the first way I met her, was that degree of humility. And that has never abated. You know, we've been very close for a very long time. And her, there is no degree of fame, wealth, or whatever that should erode your access to humility.
Oprah. Just the gifts that she's given all of us, they're overwhelming.
Indeed.
So on to Selma, and of course we've talked a little bit about it already. You know, we can't overstate the importance of this movie and your performance, which earned you an Indie Spirit nom and a Golden Globe nomination. How did that movie change your life, but how did it also put you in a category of acting that you've had to work hard to get away from? Because with the gift of that role, one of the most iconic figures in the history of the world, I have to imagine it has hamstrung you from being seen as able to do other things. That's just my guess, but tell me how you navigated that.
That's a great question. I've never actually been asked that question before, because it's true, and the assumption is the opposite, that it's opened all the doors, and it's so I'm so blown away by the question, I forgot the first part of the question. What was the first part?
Well, just how playing this role changed your life.
Oh, yes.
And obviously we know probably mostly positive ways, but also how have you worked hard to position yourself for opportunities that aren't in line with perhaps how people saw you in the scope of that type of character?
Yeah. Well, in the immediate, the way it changed my life was in ways that I couldn't have anticipated, because the film came out and was immediately attacked, and attacked. The accusation was that the film was inaccurate, historically inaccurate.
I remember some of this, but what were the criticisms specifically about the history piece?
There was a historian who came out and said that the Selma March was actually Lyndon Johnson's idea, not Dr. King or the Civil Rights Movement's idea.
It's a pretty big issue, like in terms of recollection of a fact.
And a complete lie and fabrication. And then the other notion was that Lyndon Johnson was unfairly represented, that he was much more of a friend to the Civil Rights Movement.
This was Tom Wilkinson playing Johnson.
He's Tom Wilkinson, yeah. And so that was the accusation. And award season is a very politicized situation. Neither I nor Ava had any experience of it. And so when those accusations came, we just, went about defending what we had done. But we didn't realize, what we subsequently realized is that another studio had waged a campaign against the film. They had hired that historian to plant those stories.
So obviously they were threatened by this movie being a part of the race.
Correct. We found this out after the fact, because Ava used to be a publicist, and the publicist from the other studio called to apologize to her, saying we did not realize that it would get as bad as it got. And they literally were told by their boss at the studio to put out a hit on the film. But we didn't know that at the time. We were just like, what is going on? Like,
we just made this beautiful story. We're hoping to share it.
Why are we having to defend the fact that Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement legitimately went about acquiring the Voting Rights Act of 1965? Like, why is this a conversation? We were so thrown by it, but the damage was done. In terms of the voting body that is the Academy. And so that was reflected in the nominations that year. And it started this movement called Oscar So White. And the reason I bring it up is I wasn't prepared, neither Ava or I were prepared, and did not anticipate that our film would get politicized to that degree.
And then suddenly you're expected to address this in every interview.
Correct.
And sort of unfairly having to weigh in on something that you had nothing to do with.
Correct. And so it was back to the Henry VI situation of like everything was about race and of course the film Selma touches on race, but it was in a kind of in a really toxic way. It became about representation in movies. It became about Oscar So White. It became about the industry. So we became poster boy and girl for that. And then the phrase snubbed just became completely synonymous with, because wonderfully people felt that we should have got more nominations than we did, and so it was snubbed this, snubbed that, and I would be in the airport, like, man, these again, and I was just like, I need to get my plane, and it was everywhere I went was people just like so upset. I was in South Africa and people were just like, these motherfuckers. And I found myself consoling people, going, it's okay. We're gonna be okay. We're gonna be okay. I think we're gonna be okay.
I think there are certain movies each season where people start to project stresses onto these films, or sort of like their own baggage onto some of these movies. Some of which is warranted, but oftentimes it's just, hey, maybe just write an essay or an editorial instead. Right.
Yeah.
If you have ideas that you want to voice, go about it in a way that's a bit more constructive.
It would have been helpful for me at the time. I'll say that much. But I will say it went on to be a beautiful thing, because to be honest, what the film didn't get became one of the sources of how much support I've been afforded as an actor. Because of that whole thing, it kind of made the film have a bigger notoriety maybe than it would have had. But to answer your other question around the limitations, I had been working up until doing Selma, but I think, the first time most people who are aware of me became aware of me was doing Selma. And, that's such an indelible figure. And I physically transformed in order to play, I gained like 30 pounds to play him. I shaved my hairline back. I was, and so what happened was two things. After that film, got offered every civil rights movement leader imaginable.
A lot of period pieces.
Period pieces. I was, I said no to all of them because I was like, I just played the guy. I think I'm...
Right, who else would you be offered after
Where do you
that?
go? Where do you go after Dr. King? Yeah, so I was like, no, I don't want to do that. But also, in all honesty, the amount of times because I gained that weight to play that role, and everywhere I would go when I finally got the weight off again, man, you look good. I was like, oh, thank you. I mean, well, I'm actually not like Dr. King. And for years, I was in a movie and I was just the way I am, man, I didn't know you got all of that going on under there. I was like,
It's really the curse of being so great in a role that people are not able to separate you from the performance.
I guess so. And so I recognize that, but champagne problem. If there's anyone you're going to be consistently associated with, Dr. King's not a bad one.
And I do appreciate he was painted as a fallible person.
Yes.
His indiscretions and mistakes were also not removed from the story.
Right.
And I think that's also what made it one of the best portraits I've seen of him, is that, he was just a regular person. He was flawed, but he had a heart and he had such great hopes for us. Yeah. And I think I really connected with your portrayal.
Well, that was something Ava and I were very fixated on, was you can't actually play an icon. That's not a thing. You can play a human being. And also, we've seen so much footage of Dr. King. There's so many documentaries out there. If all you're seeing is a further validation of those images you've already seen, there's no point of doing the movie. And one of the great gifts was trying to build what he must have been like when the cameras went on him, when he wasn't giving a speech, when he was, and he was a fallible man. And to have him in those situations, was the most interesting stuff for me to explore as an actor. And I think the most interesting moments in the film were where you're watching something that feels revelatory rather than just, like I say, a validation of what you've already seen. So that was the gift of Ava's version of the script, because the first version of the script I ever read, funnily enough, had Lyndon Johnson as the lead, and Dr. King was a supporting character. And there's a tradition of that being how these kind of films got made. Last King of Scotland was the same thing. James McAvoy was the lead. Forest Whitaker was a supporting character. It's the sheer force of his performance that shifted it in the edit. It's
sort of shot originally from James' point of view.
Absolutely.
Mostly.
And that was the book, The Last King of Scotland, was all from the Scottish doctor's point of view. That was the script I read. But, even though we were all freaked out by Forrest's on the set, they got in the edit. And I happen to know this because I spoke to Kevin MacDonald about it. He thought he had a mess of a movie because he couldn't talk to Forest Whitaker. He just couldn't have a proper conversation. And he went in the edit and was like, that's what he was doing. And that dictated what that film became. It wasn't until Ava came along and made it a film that wasn't just about the movement, but made it about the women in the film. Before Ava came on, I had only one scene where I was in proximity of Carmen Ejogo as Coretta Scott King, and the others were phone calls. And there were certainly no roles that you could have had Lorraine Toussaint or Tessa Thompson or Oprah Winfrey or Niecy Nash. That was all Ava. She brought that into into the film. And that made it, my role, richer, because you then had human beings around him that allowed him to be a human being, as opposed to just this.
And they also humbled him a lot.
For sure.
Which I think is what we respond to in that movie.
And it was more true. Like women, Coretta Scott King was the person who inspired Martin Luther King towards being a leader of the civil rights movement. She couldn't do it at that time because of the inherent sexism even within the civil rights movement. But to tell that story without the importance of the women of that movement would have just been such a travesty and an injustice. And Ava understood that, which is why she did what she did, which is why, again, the attacks on the movie, which after the fact, they did literally a study on the film and deemed the film 100% accurate.
So I'd like to talk about Bass Reeves, one of your accomplishments in the last few years on Paramount Plus. You were very involved in this production. But I want to talk a little bit about the backstory of selling this project. Morgan Freeman tried for many years to tell this story. And for those who don't know, Bass Reeves was the first Black American deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River. So Morgan hadn't been successful in telling this story. And then you also tried to tell this story for a while. What were you met with in those pitch meetings, and when did interest shift in this story for you?
I remember very clearly the first time we went out with the project, we took it to every network, every cable channel at the time, and the first time we went out in 2015, the narrative was, we're not doing this because no one's doing Westerns, was the narrative. And then 2 years later, I was just, again, obsessed with how can the Bass Reeves story not have been told yet? I was a huge fan of Westerns growing up. I didn't even know that 1 in 4, maybe even 1 in 3 cowboys was black. I didn't know that the phrase cowboy was to do with just how many black cowboys there was. It was a pejorative. They used to be called cowpunchers. It's only because there were so many black cowpunchers, they ended up calling them cowboys, because that was, an epithet you would throw at black people. So I remained obsessed with this thing. So the first time around, they said, we're not doing this, no one's doing Westerns. 2017, we went out. The narrative was, we're not doing this because everyone's doing Westerns.
That 2-year period, Taylor Sheridan had single-handedly changed the marketplace.
But that was pre Yellowstone.
Oh, this is pre-Yellowstone.
2017, we didn't have Yellowstone yet. Right. And so, but that, when you had those two narratives in such quick succession, you're going, this smells fishy. I think you're just saying what you need to say to get me out the door. Because I see such potency in this. I mean, like, it virtually writes itself, this incredible story. But to your point, it wasn't until Taylor came along and showed there was an indisputable audience, not only with Yellowstone, but 1883, I think, was the big shift, when that was a big show for them and things like that. I also think the murder of George Floyd played a huge part. It was a moment where our industry was trying to do better. Oh, the days.
We'll get to that later.
And so I think the confluence of what was happening at Paramount Plus with Taylor, this cultural correction moment we had around representation, and just a seeming appetite for the Western in the audience. We were coming out of the pandemic where Yellowstone had blown up because we were all sat at home looking for things to watch. And so that's what ended up bringing it about. But that was the culmination of a nine-year journey.
So before we talk about government cheese, I do want to acknowledge Coriolanus that you did last fall, Royal National Theatre in London. How did it feel to be performing Shakespeare again? And how do you feel you've changed as an artist since your first go at doing Shakespeare?
It was so terrifying.
More so than when you were younger the first time?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. When I was playing Henry VI at the Royal Shakespeare Company, I was 23, 24. It's the same thing. I had the privilege of playing a Tuskegee in a film called Red Tails, and we got to interview some of the guys who are now in their 80s and 90s. And we got to go up in P-52s, and it's like flying in a sardine can. It is so terrifying. And we weren't getting shot at, you know. So I remember asking, like, would you ever do something like that again? And they went, hell no. And I was like, why? He said, we were 19, we were 21, we didn't know. You know, they were like, even when they got into their 30s, like, what were we thinking? And so it's the same.
The fear comes later in life.
Yes, I think so. When you get in your head, when you, dare I say, get a bit of a reputation and a notoriety. And it's like the same thing with kids. You know, they throw their bodies around because they don't really know what it feels like to fall from a greater height. You know, as you start getting taller and taller, the floor's further away and it hurts more when you fall. And so, you know, what happened, I hadn't done a play, let alone a Shakespeare play, in 9 years. I did Othello in New York in 2016. And that was, you know, Daniel Craig and I I was playing Othello, he was playing Iago. So people were coming to see Daniel Craig, people were coming to see Bond. So I could hide behind him a little bit, it wasn't as terrifying. What I couldn't have anticipated is by the time I was playing Coriolanus at the National Theatre, which is the theatre I had wanted to play, the Olivier stage specifically, my whole career. I remember in the previews, because it was a 1,200 seat theatre, you know, 1,200 people, it's 3 hours of Shakespeare, you're Coriolanus, there's no Daniel Craig next to you in Coriolanus. And I remember being so terrified for the first preview and going, I think one of the reasons these people are here is because I'm playing Coriolanus. Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! You know, I remember it being that, because all of my theatre performances before then, I thought, oh, it's Othello. You know, it's just a great play, it's Daniel Craig, it's Henry VI, it's the Royal Shakespeare Company. This was like, I had played Dr. King in Selma. I had done Bass Reeves at that point. I had done the kind of work, and I could tell by the marketing, I think they're selling this with my name. And it was I genuinely mean it. It was something that hit me differently.
So the stakes were much higher.
The stakes were higher, and the notion that I am carrying the show, whether that was true or not, because I was an amazing cast of actors, but that got in my head a little bit, and the previews were truly uncomfortable for me as a result, because I just got in my head about, oh gosh, you're supposed to be a good actor, so now you're back with the best playwright in living history, and you better bring it. And some of my earlier career was built on I'll show you, you know, and I'll show you is active energy. It's
a fight.
It's a fight, and I it's much. The race is, I think, easier when you are behind and feeling the need to catch up than when you are up front and the finish line is up there and you feel like there are those who are not down with the idea of you remaining in pole position. This is all internal monologue stuff. I'm not saying it's tied to reality, but that's why the previews in particular were quite tricky for me. Then I found a flow state after that. When I got out of my head, the reviews were great. It was going well. But it's the imposter syndrome thing, you know. And I remember doing a show with Judi Dench, who we were recording this thing live, and it's Judi Dench, and she's as nervous as can be backstage. And I'm thinking, why are you nervous? And she went, oh, it never goes, darling, it never goes. And I was like, oh no, it never goes.
But that's the secret to success, it seems.
I think so.
And it's what Oprah was channeling that day when you saw her, like never assuming anything.
I think that's exactly correct. Because I think that's when you start to slide, when you're not putting in the work to the same degree, because you take things for granted. You think, you're welcome. You've come to see me. That's enough.
There are a lot of actors who present that as their persona.
You see it when there's a big discrepancy between early performances of an actor and later performances. You can tell when they've sort of got comfortable.
We call phoning that in.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Well, I wish I could have seen it. I tried desperately to get to London, but I couldn't make it. Hopefully next time.
It's okay.
So Government Cheese, a very fun, quirky show on Apple TV Plus I've been enjoying. You play Hampton Chambers, an ex-con who returns home to Chatsworth, California. So this is loosely inspired by Paul's childhood, the creator and one of the directors. It's very dreamy, it's strange, absurd, and it's been so fun to see you in this quirky world. And I'm curious, what tropes and stereotypes were you most excited to turn on their heads and to subvert in making this show?
Well, we talked earlier about some of the challenges, and I pause in saying that in relation to playing Dr. King, because so much of it has been a huge blessing. But one of the elements is that I am known for doing period stuff, and it's Selma, it's The Butler, in relation to the 60s specifically, The Help, but all of those are tied to racial struggle. All of those are tied to civil rights. All of those are tied to the challenges of being black in America. And so to do something set in the 60s that is celebratory, that is quirky, that is irreverent. No one is suffering. There are challenges, all the stuff that we as human beings go through, but none of it is tied specifically to race. And that was just very refreshing, because the reality is, even though that was an incredibly challenging time for black people in America, that continues to be the case to this day. But when you're living your life, that's not the totality of your existence anywhere. And you wouldn't know that to watch film, American film, when it comes to black people. So for me, when Paul approached me in 2018 with a short film script. So again, what I would say to people is keep your eyes open and your nose to the ground. You might just be sat next to someone who's gonna tell you about Ava DuVernay, or you might have Paul Hunter say, well, there's this short film script I would like you to consider, and you actually read it and you go, whoa, that is not like anything I have ever read before. It's so unique, so, as you say, quirky, based on his upbringing in the Valley.
And I've never seen that world in this community depicted ever.
No.
Like a black family living in the Valley.
Right.
It seems so simple.
Right.
But we've never seen it.
Exactly. And he grew up in Pacoima, and then they were in Chatsworth themselves. I've lived in the Valley for 18 years myself. And I just hadn't seen that on screen before. And I just loved how, I'm a big fan of the Coen brothers, of Spike Jonze, of Wes Anderson, but so often as black people, when it comes to doing something that is where you're coloring out the line, outside of the lines, so to speak, you feel the need to contextualize or explain your existence. And that's because we haven't had as many at-bats. So when you are gonna do, if we were to do our version of Poor Things. Yeah. If black people were to do Poor Things, the levels of confusion as to what are y'all trying to say? Like, what is happening here? Now, as a white person, as Yorgos Lanthimos, you can come in and do whatever at the end is someone's got a duck body and a person's head or something like at the end of the, and that's just, you go, yeah, great. Let's throw all the awards at that, And I'm being facetious, but it's absolutely true. If a black director, writer, just decided to set that within the Valley,
which, by the way, sounds amazing.
Which I think so, and that's what I like to think. You would have so many questions. You would from everyone, by the way, from the black community as well.
Like, what is this movie trying to say?
What are we trying to say? And that's to do with the fact that we haven't had enough contextualization of the black experience to get to the point whereby we are just so happy to see yet another facet. And so that's why, for me, Government Cheese is such a blessing, because it represents that. It represents, I'm not going to explain to you why I have these premonitions that feel tied to a biblical story that you may or may not have read. I'm not going to explain to you why I have that walk, because I have music in my head everywhere I go. I'm not going to explain it to you. You're just going to come on the ride or not, because that is the luxury that those filmmakers...
And Charlie Kaufman working with Spike Jonze.
Literally.
They are not spelling out being John Malkovich. They're just giving it to us.
And
we
they're
accept
celebrated for it. It is the very thing that distinguishes them as filmmakers and storytellers. The fact that they get to go on these flights of fancy, and we are just supposed to be thankful. And I am, by the way. But it's not the same when it comes to when you're a marginalized group, because the notion of you needing to explain your existence is, I think, part of a system of oppression, which is the know your place. When your film or your show succeeds, you overperformed. You know, all of these mindsets that are kind of insidious around what should be an art form that is consistently pushing that art form, pressuring that art form, moving it forward. And when it comes to other people doing that, there is this, and it's a supremacist mindset, right? Which is like, know your place. You're impinging upon what the apex of this art form looks like, and that is traditionally occupied by a certain demographic. And so the fact that Apple came the journey with us to do this, that's one of the things.
We're willing to invest in this story.
And didn't necessarily totally understand all of it, but trusted us to go and make something because of its uniqueness. And the fact that we had a proof of concept in the short film was massive as well. And that was the thing that gave them the confidence to go the road with us.
That is so cool. And one thing that has always bugged me, speaking about award season, is until American Fiction, I can't think of another film that we have celebrated during award season that allows black characters to live in modern, contemporary times. Right. Every movie that has been celebrated, really in the last 50 years, has always been period pieces. So what I would love to see in award season is Silver Linings Playbook, that type of story, allowing characters to just be. And I loved American Fiction. I hope we see more of that moving forward, because I think your time is now for another awards character, David.
I love you for that. Thank you very much.
So my final question for you, sir, and we could sit here all day, but we must wrap. What do you hope listeners of this podcast take away from hearing your Hollywood story?
I hope that anyone who's really struggling with the notion of whether they should remain an actor, a writer, a producer, a director, the thing that they come away with is the fact that tenacity is the key. It's an interminably difficult profession, let alone if you're going to try and create space for yourself, because that space doesn't yet exist. The things I have done that I'm most proud of have all taken years to come to fruition. Government Cheese is actually the fastest at 6 years. You know, it was 2019 we made the short film. Selma was 7 years. United Kingdom was 7 years. Bass Reeves was 9, nearly 10 years. I wanted to play Coriolanus for 25 years. And it's having a vision for what it is you want to do, and just every single day you move the needle a bit, and you do what Tom Cruise said: create, create, create. That's the key. You know, that mentality combined with tenacity is, as far as I can see, the path to success.
And the last part of the question, what have you learned about yourself in sharing your story today?
That defying my dad was a very, very good thing. As you know, my dad's no longer with us now, and you know, he was literally my hero. And I jest, but you kind of have to have a self-belief that is rooted in dreams, because my dad couldn't dream as big as I was because of the limitations of his own experience. And that's not his fault. But thankfully, he created, and my mother created, just enough space, just enough self of self that I could dream beyond what they could dream. And, my son is now at Lambda, the very school that I went to. And one of the amazing things, I went to give a talk, not unlike this, at Lambda with him in the audience. And I said to this group of like 200 students, I said, when I came to Lambda in 1995, I was the only black student of 300 students, the only black student. And I was looking at a room filled with black and brown and Asian, and it was an amazing sight. And they couldn't quite understand that only 25 years prior, this was not the case. And that said to me that they now have a platform to dream bigger than I could, because I didn't see what they now see. And that to me was really, really beautiful, not only with those students, but with my own son. And so, to hold on to those dreams, to know that they are as important as anything else you will do, your training, your whatever, and then to try and every day to figure out how you're going to step into those dreams. That is the key. And so for me to have lived that and to see my son on the precipice of that is a really, really magnificent thing.
David, thank you for everything you've done, and we cannot wait to see what you do next. We are so grateful. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Stacey.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. My Hollywood Story is a production of Hippolyta Films and Entertainment. It is produced by me, Stacey Wilson Hunt, along with Sonia Slutsky and Wendy Green. Series producers also include Daryl Young and Janet Grayson. Our sound mixer is Luke Tierney, with camera by Ramiro Cantu. My Hollywood Story is edited by Nathaniel Wixon, with original music by Madi Gabriel and Jenny Carr of Moon and Star. Our logo design is by Brad Mitchell, and I'd like to give a special thanks to Champion Turf. My Hollywood Story is sponsored by Mattel Films and recorded at Neue House Hollywood. If you like what you hear, give us a follow, leave a review, and let us know what you think.